All right, so you know who I am already, so just skip over this, but when you get the slides, there's my contact details, and if you have any questions at any stage, just feel free to get in touch by email or on LinkedIn or whatever. Okay. So actually, today what I want to talk about is reactive microservices. So Spring Boot, been using Spring Boot for a while, but recently this year, they released version 2 of Spring Boot, so in February, and that that has a new stack in there. So traditionally Spring Boot was built on top of the servlet container, and the new version is built on top of Netty Engine. So it's much more reactive, much more performant. So what is Spring Boot? And sorry, I'm not a bit disorganized at the moment. What I meant to say is I only have a few slides, and then we're just going to dip into trying to write some code. Okay, so most of the content tonight will be me attempting to write a microservice with Spring Boot live. So hopefully it won't work.
What can go wrong?
Everything. well, the time I did this in Rostov, and yeah, everything went wrong that time. So Spring Boot itself, is anybody here using Spring Boot already? All right, so you guys know the main thing about Spring Boot is that you're able, instead of deploying to a container like Tomcat or WebSphere if you want, if you're mad, you can bundle everything into a single monolithic jar file, and you can deploy that as your unit of deployment. So I think the joke is make jar, not war. Right, so that's the common joke. The thing about Spring Boot as well is there's no code generation going on, right? So you write the minimal amount of code, you get started really quickly, and you don't have a phase where you're generating code. And that would probably go back to I played around with Spring Roo there when it first came out, and that was generating code. And it had the same goal of making things easy to start, but it relied on code generation. One of the other features about Spring Boot that's good is that out of the box, it's aimed to be deployable to production. So what they've done is they've put in features to allow you to easily manage your logging, your monitoring, and instrument your application with metrics. But in order to achieve that, they have to be opinionated. So they have to decide this is the way you're going to write your application, because they can't give too much choice. Now there is a lot of choice and flexibility. You can plug in different providers for certain components, but they restrict which of those you can do. So monitoring being an example, you can put in multiple backends for monitoring at the moment. So it's obviously it's Spring. It's built on the Spring framework, and it's driven by it's a real convention over configuration. And they have two concepts in there. They have the idea of a starter and an auto configuration. And the idea of a starter is that's a dependency that you put in your application that bundles up a load of functionality. Like, so if you want to have a web MVC application, you stick the web MVC starter in. If you want to use the Mongo database, you use the MongoDB data starter, right? So that thing. And auto configuration is how they make this work. So, you know, if anybody's used to building and managing Spring XML configuration files, you have to create all your beans that you're going to use. But in Spring Boot, you don't have to create the beans, because what they do is they scan the class path, they check your properties that you might have set in your application, and they use that information to decide what beans that they're going to configure. And it's possible, although we won't be looking at it today, but it is possible if you have your own frameworks and stuff like that you want to use that you've maybe developed in-house, you can actually, if you bundle that up in a starter and an auto configurer, you'll be able to ship that easily and get the rest of your team to use it across the organization. Now, as I said, Spring Boot 2.0 came out in February, and this pretty much, I was watching this nearly every day waiting for it to be released. So the thing is, what they've done is they went back and they've just thrown away. So Spring Boot 4 supports Java 6. So Java 6, Java 7, they're end of life now. So Spring Framework 5, it requires Java 8 out of the box. And they're doing that because they've changed all of their functions and APIs to support lambdas wherever possible, and streams. So you need Java 8. It does work with Java 9, or it did work with Java 9 in February, and I have tried it with Java 10, and there are some warnings that you get, but by and large it works.
Hey, are you enjoying our video? Excellent. In 2006, we set out to get all the Java community to come together to talk about the language they love. The Dublin Java User Group was born. From humble beginnings with pub meetups, we now bring in Java rockstars and Java champions to Dublin every month. With the knowledge they share, these are the guys that want to help you enrich your working life. So sit back, listen in, and study those slides carefully. They are full of gems. By the end of this video, if you've learned something fabulous or have ignited just one great idea, go straight to your boss and demand a DubJug membership. Just imagine what it would be like for you to be networking and sharing great ideas with 40 other Java developers at our next event.
So that was one of the key features in it. The thing though that made it really interesting was they built in support for writing reactive web applications or services, and they bundle that in a component called WebFlux, and they did it in a way that would make it easy for somebody who's already writing web MVC applications to actually adopt WebFlux. So basically it's the same annotations. So if you have get mapping and stuff like that to mark out your controller or at-rest controller or path variable, that will all work, right? Now you still have to, things have got moved around and dependencies have changed, but the way you write your code is still the same. The code is pretty much the same. You'll probably have to go in and just repair a few class paths and stuff like that, but other than that, and package names, other than that, it should work, right? I'm not going to look at this, but another thing that they did was there is a functional reactive web component as well released. So if anybody's familiar with things like Scala, where you write router functions and things like that, that's what the reactive web functionality is, or sorry, the functional reactive web, sorry. It allows you to define a function that will map to your endpoints in your application. And it fits more with the functional programming paradigms, but writing the handlers is a little bit more complex. So I've steered away from that at the moment. They think it's a big deal. I don't really agree with it myself, but they support Kotlin out of the box, right? So if you really want to program in Kotlin, you know, it's a first-class language as far as Spring are concerned. So because it's reactive, it's not just reactive in the web framework, right? So what they've done is they've added in the Spring Data project, they've added in for where databases such as Cassandra, Couchbase, Mongo, and them, where they support asynchronous calls, there is now a wrapper for Spring Data that will actually invoke those repositories in a functional manner, or sorry, in a reactive manner. So some web frameworks, or sometimes when you're writing non-blocking functionality, you end up blocking when you talk to the database. Well, here you have to go out of your way to shoot yourself in the foot, right? So they're making it easy for you not to do it. And they improved how they do metrics. So before, what they used to do was they used to use drop wizard metrics in Spring Boot. But now they've created their own project called Micrometer. And they sort of build this as the SLF for J for metrics, right? So the idea is that you should be able to plug in any logging backend behind this seamlessly. So you use their annotations, all of that, and it doesn't matter. So it works with like Prometheus, Datadog. There's obviously JMX support, HTTP support. There's about 10 different backends that it'll support. So this is sort of built into, and this is in the actuator framework, they call it, where that's the production ready features out of the box. So, right, why is anybody doing reactive programming at the moment? And in Java or Scala, right? Yeah. So the benefits of doing reactive programming is that you perform things that are I/O bound. You perform them asynchronously. So that means that, and in a non-blocking manner. So you don't need a thread. There's an event loop driving the whole thing, so there's no threads being blocked. And you can actually get it down to, you just need to have the same number of threads as cores on your machine, and you'll still get the performance. And it's all driven by callbacks, right? But if you're doing something like Node.js and you're trying to write all the callbacks for that, it can get quite messy to keep track of. And what they've done in Spring Boot is they've made that more like working with Java 8 streams, right? So that's what it feels like when you're doing it. Yeah, you can serve more requests, streaming as well. So as well, especially in database, you know, when you're getting data back, you collect all your data and then you write it to your response body. That's actually Spring Boot, the reactive framework, or sorry, I should say Webflux, takes care of that. So what you just do is you give Webflux a pipeline to execute, and it'll start sending the data as soon as it arrives through that pipeline. And so you should start your web applications, especially if you're serving a big list of data, they should start to respond a lot quicker, or from the user's perspective. And the other thing as well is Webflux supports back pressure. So if your application is under load, it can send a signal to the client to say, slow down, stop sending me requests for a little while. And that's handled by Webflux. You don't have to code that in yourself. So that's the advantage of using Webflux.
Jerry Nolan here from Stack & Co. When you want to change your job, you'll want to make a move which will give you career growth, interesting projects, and a fresh challenge. At Stack & Co, we can help you make that career enriching move by taking the time to really understand your individual interest and what represents the best next step for you. Let's have a confidential conversation to discover your career enriching move. Contact me on www.stackand.co.
In fact, if I try and remember correctly, it doesn't work with HTTP2, or it didn't work with HTTP2 at the start, right? Because I think it was Tomcat that was lagging, and they wanted it to work on Tomcat as well. So, and that's the point. Sorry, I glossed over that. Yes, it runs on top of Netty, but it also runs on top of Tomcat, Jetty, and Undertow as well. So you can still, if you really want to have a servlet in there as well, and you want to mix the two of them together, you can actually just have the one container in your application. Sorry, and it's done again. The way they did this in Spring Boot was they didn't build all this as part of Spring Boot. They forked it off as a separate library called Project Reactor. So it can be used on its own, right? So you don't have to be using Spring Boot to actually use the reactive primitives that they support. So how does it work? So it works because they support two entities that you return. One is a mono, that's when you're returning a single item. So it's sort of like a Java optional, right? So if you were, instead of returning a POJO from your handler endpoint, you return a mono of that POJO. Even though it is a a single item. It could be a single item that's a list. So some people still respond with lists and maps and things like that in this. But ideally, it's just if you've done a create request or a update or a get request for a single item, you'd use a mono. Flux is more like a Java 8 stream, and we'll see how they work. And it's when you're returning multiple items, right? So if you're returning the result of a list, a database query that returns a list, you would return it as a flux. And so that the idea being that the client can consume that as it's sent from the server, not waiting for the whole transaction at the back end to complete. Okay. So
I have a question about mono.
yeah.
It's similar to Java optional because it could be empty.
It could be empty, yeah.
Okay.
And one thing I actually left off here, which is important as well. The problem with that you see or that I see with Java 8 streams is that if you have an exception, how do you get that exception out of the stream?
Well, you need to wrap.
You need to wrap it, yeah. Whereas the mono and flux, they have that built in, so you can return an error at any point. You can create a mono that's an error. That is the exception that you want to throw, and that will be sent back down through the pipeline. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try and write a little service. The way to do it, the way to get started with Spring Boot is to write an application really quickly, is to use this website start.spring.io. It's called Spring Initialzr, and it's just a web interface that we'll go to now that allows you just say what libraries I want to use from Spring, and then it gives you a zip file, and then you can use that as your starter project. But it's literally nothing more than the build script. You still have to do all the work yourself. But with Spring Boot, you don't have to do a lot of work. So that's the advantage. And it is built into IntelliJ, so where's our IntelliJ winner? There's a plugin in IntelliJ that will allow you to use this out of the box without having to go to the website. And you can curl it as well, but I don't know the syntax for curling it. So, all right. So time for it. So the first thing to do is start. That's Spring. Actually, I can see it here. That's spring.io. All right. So really, what you get is just you get a few choices. You can pick your build project. I'm going to pick Gradle, not because I prefer it, just because that's what I'm used to at the moment. You pick Java. Whoa. So you can pick your language as being Java, Kotlin, or if you're really insane, you can pick Groovy. Actually, I have. Yeah, but I have. Well, I don't know. I think I would prefer Scala to Groovy. My colleagues can attest to this. They've had to listen to me. I did actually hear mention that Scala was supported or would be supported, but I haven't seen any follow-up on that. But you can, anyway, with Spring Boot. I have done Spring Boot apps with Scala, so obviously you can pick the version. 2.02 is the currently released version, and that's what we're going to use. And the idea of this is that you give it, and I have to pick something different for a second because I have backups on my machine that I don't want to overwrite just in case things go pear-shaped. All right, so actually no, call it example, that's fine. I'll call it sample, okay. And the idea is here, you pick what libraries you want to use. So like, I want to use Web Flux, so I'm just going to say I want reactive web. So I can pick that. I said I need Mongo. I'm gonna pick security, but I'm gonna disable it once I download it, because we'll talk about why I have to do that initially. And what else did I say I needed?
So it's Mongo or reactive Mongo?
That's a good point. It should be reactive Mongo. Thank you.
actuator as well?
Actuator, thank you. So actuator is the component that does the logging and the monitoring and controlling and all and endpoints that you can use. Now, they're the options that I want to use. You can actually click on this, switch to full version, and you can actually get a better view of all of the libraries and stuff like that Spring Boot auto or Spring Starter auto initializes. So so there's the core stuff there. DevTools is meant to make life easier, but it never works for me. So DevTools is meant to help you stop needing to do restarts and stuff like that. But I've never got that to successfully work. And I was just going down. There is obviously there's templating engines. Timeleaf is so if you're building user interfaces, Timeleaf 3 can now handle the reactive responses from the request handler. So that's the obvious choice if you're building a front end application. SQL, the catch with SQL is there's no reactive JDBC driver. So if you want it to be, if you're using SQL, you're going to end up going to block when you access the database. Okay.
It isn't official yet.
Yeah. But these guys don't support it. So the catch is that when you pick these things here, there's a Spring Data module that does all of the auto configures everything for you. So if you end up using something that's not on this list, you've got to actually handle all that auto configuration yourself. You've got to do all of that work. So.
What's the name of the reactive
Postgres has an implementation.
Okay, so
And some Oracle has Oracle reactive JDBC being
okay, so it's vendor specific.
It's vendor specific?
Yeah, it's not been standardized yet, right? Yeah. So the other things here is there is other stuff here. There's the cloud projects as well. So when we talk about the cloud native stuff, these projects sort of come in. But you can pick whatever you need, build your application. So we're ready to generate, and we'll do that now. Oh yeah, and obviously you can pick a Java version. I don't know why 9's not on the list anymore, but.
9's deprecated or something. Yeah, it's end of life. Already.
Yeah, but why would they make the decision to take it off the list, you know? And up until recently, 6 and 7. I guess you'd still get 6 and 7 if you picked Spring 1.5 as your framework. So has that downloaded? It's downloaded, and where is it? It's called sample, right? There it is, and it's unzipped. Okay, so now we can just launch IntelliJ and open it up.
I'm Catherine Askell, the founder of Guru Team. Guru Team specialises in delivering high-end ICT technical training and consultancy services. What makes us different is that we employ the creme de la creme of specialist instructors who have vast real-world experience and passion for the technologies they teach. With a continually evolving portfolio of over 250 courses, we can customise a programme to suit your team. We have one of the largest portfolio of cloud, Linux and development courses in Ireland and have several accreditations including the Linux Foundation, LPI and the DevOps Institute. We would be delighted to talk with you about working with your teams, so please visit our website on www.guruteamirl.com.
Right. And I'm just gonna, so they're the ones I saved from earlier, just in case things don't work out. Where are we gonna go? Documents. Downloads. Okay. Sample. Project. Import. Okay. Now No. So just want to just check that it didn't pick Java 10 for me, because it sometimes does. Yeah, it picked Java 10. Right. Right, so the project that you get generated really, is the build file. It's the main thing. There is a specific Spring Boot plugin that handles all of the packaging. So it doesn't just make a jar file, it actually relocates the classes in a subdirectory, a special subdirectory, and it puts in a loader, a bootstrapper, and all that sort of stuff. So that plugin takes care of doing all of that for you. The other thing as well that Spring Boot, if you're familiar with Gradle, you know that the version number is missing. But that doesn't matter, because they've also provide this dependency management plugin there, and that works off a curated list of dependencies called a bill of materials. It's actually defined in Maven, but it's interpreted by this plugin. There's nothing else. We don't have to declare the bill of materials in here, but sometimes you will see it in projects. The reason we don't have to declare it is because the Spring Boot plugin takes care of that for us. The libraries that we have, you just see in here the name. That's not legible. Sorry. Where's this gone? Yeah. So the libraries that you see here. I was talking about they're called starters. So that means that they bundle up the functionality in there to take care of it. So actuator, the production ready features. They also give us a lot of frameworks for testing out of the box. So I'm not going to look at that, but the support for testing is very good, especially being able to test reactive pipelines. And the one thing you have to watch out for when you're testing a reactive pipeline is you declare the pipeline and you think you've written a unit test. It doesn't do anything. You have to execute the pipeline before you can tell whether it worked or not. So you can write tests that seem to work. If you get everything's green, but JUnit's not done anything. So that's just one thing to be careful of. Okay, so let's go into. Whoops.
Brian, could you show us the class path? Do you know how many jars it added in?
Oh yeah, so that's a good point. Yeah, so that's the one thing. It adds in a lot of jars. So the part of the drawback of Spring Boot is that it increases your distribution size, and it also increases the startup time because it has to scan that class path.
Did you try to index it?
I haven't. Sorry. Let's just exit presentation mode. Right, sorry, I'm just gonna, so go over here and you can have a look here. So this is the dependencies. Now, not necessarily all of these are going to end up in your class path, because some of these are brought in for testing purposes. But you can already see that's a pretty massive list for an application that at the moment does nothing. There is no endpoint in this application at the moment. There's no servlet. We haven't added a controller yet. So the code, but part of the advantage is the code for it is as simple as this. So this is our main line for our application, and this is where all the configuration happens. There is no controller yet, so if we want to add in a controller, we can add it in a as a separate class, but I'm going to stick it in here now for a minute just to get things going. So if we want to have a controller that just says something like public class sample controller. So to note that this is a controller, we'll just use the REST template, or sorry, REST controller. So now that's a controller, and we have to give it an endpoint. So we're just going to say get mapping hello, right? And we'll just say public string, or sorry, mono. So we're going to return a mono response, and that's just going to say hello. We'll leave that for a minute, and then we'll just say return mono just. So instead of, you know, an optional, it was was of, but in this it's just. There's a just or empty, there's error. Okay, they're the main things that if you want to manufacture something. So we'll just say just hello. Okay, so all right, the typical standard simplest thing you can possibly do, right? Now, this is not going to work out of the box. So let's just run that.
So is it the Mongo instance is embedded on your
No, so I've got a Mongo container running on my machine, running in Docker on my machine. There is an embedded Mongo option that you can pick, but I just have one running. It's the way I like to work. I like to have the database running external to the application. So, all right, so we'll just go in here and we'll go HTTP localhost 8080 hello. So it's asking me to log in. So the reason it's asking me to provide a login and it won't work is because I put security on the class path. So if I want to, I can turn it off and stuff like that. And we're going to turn it off now just temporarily. But I just wanted to demonstrate that I didn't have to do anything. It automatically detected it and applied it. So what we need to do is window, just exit. Just go in. Just temporarily, we'll take it out until we get things up and running. And then we'll do the opposite to what you're meant to do. We'll put security in at the end. All right, just for convenience. So there we go. We're able to run it again. Stop and rerun. And we'll just go hello. So it just gives back hello. So it's as simple as that, just to return a response, right? Now, if we want to actually make that something more meaningful and maybe put in a POJO that we store in the database. So let's have a look at how we would do that. So the first thing you need to do is, well, we need to have our POJO. So let's just say to-do item. And task, int priority, and let's just give it an ID. Oh, sorry, that should be private. String ID. Now, this will work with Lombok as well if you want to avoid doing stuff. Getter and setter.
Hi there, it's Sergio Dobrovolsky here from VersioOne, an IT consulting company that has a main focus on innovation. We believe that innovation is a key factor in being successful. That's why we created an innovation lab, a place where we can experiment, try new technologies, express ourselves. So in order to bring more value as possible to the company and to the community as well. If you're looking for new challenges and if you want to experiment the innovation with us, don't be shy and come and talk to us.
Right. So that's our simple POJO that we want to create. It just has the getters and setters. I actually can't remember off the top of my head. I had this set. Oh yeah, that's it. Just make this system preferences, displays. That should be easier to see, yeah? That is not on my screen. Shit. Sorry. The mirroring, I've disabled the mirroring, sorry. All right, sorry, I can't get that working with Chrome. And I don't know what it's doing. So just try starting again. No, it's... Sorry, folks. I can't get Chrome to...
With the projector?
Projector. It's spotting it all right, but it's not...
Let me see. Okay, what do you want to cast? Do you want to cast the desktop or the...
The desktop.
Okay.
Oh yeah, okay, sorry. I see. Stop, you have to stop first, that's... Yeah. Entire screen now, perfect.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right. So sorry, we generated the Pojo. So the other thing that we need to do is we need to create an object that will, an interface in Spring Data that will persist that to the database. So let's just say to do item repository. Oh, sorry, that should be a class, or sorry, an interface. And interface. And if I do implements, extend, sorry, good point. Reactive Mongo repository. So it's going to be for it to do, we have to tell it what type the Pojo is and what type the identifier is. So it's just going to be a string. Now, if we wanted to, so we've got that done. So that is it. You don't have to provide any implementation for the repository. You just have to declare it. Now, if you have special queries that you want to do, you can actually, there's a way of encoding the queries in a sort of in a Java-like DSL that you can put in here. And there's also some annotations that you can use. But we're just going to use the basic CRUD operations that are provided by the parent repository. So we don't need to worry about doing that. Obviously, we want this in our controller. So we're going to just do, we'll just auto wire it. to-do item repository. And it's complaining, but so what we want to do is, first thing we'll just might as well do is we'll add in a post. And that will just say we'll say items. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to return the to-do item again, and we'll just say call that create. And it, yeah, it's all right. I'll try it now. I lose the screen when I do this, so if I put it into presentation mode, then I have. Yeah, I know. Yeah. So we want to do a to-do item, and this is the request. And so just like if you were doing an MVC application in the past, you just have to say that there's that this is the request body. So that'll do it. We don't have to say that this is the response body. That's because we've used the REST controller annotation, so it already knows that that's the response body. And we're going to just do final to do. We'll be lazy. We'll just say request.setID and maybe just UUID random to string. So that we just need to. We're going to get in the request from the client. We're going to get all the data. So we just need to provide an ID for the database, and rather than do immutable programming, and we'll just take a shortcut here. Now to store that in the database, I just need to go repository.insert mono just request. Now what this is going to return is it's going to return a mono. So I can just return, what did I get there? Mono just request. Sorry, 1 second. Yes, that should be. No. Oh yeah, sorry, I know what I did wrong. Sorry, I picked the wrong one.
Hi there, John Bulger here from version 1, an IT consulting firm that grew from 2 people back in 1996 to over 1,000 people today, with 100 Java developers alone. Core values is something that we take very seriously in version 1, and is ingrained into every decision we make and into our culture. If core values and strong principles is something that interests you, then we would love to hear from you. You can find our website at www.version1.com. Enjoy the rest of the video.
So I'll fix that. Sorry, I shouldn't have wrapped it in a just. I should have just passed in the entity itself. Okay, I'm just going to presenter mode again. Now, so that will create it and put it into the database. The other thing that I need to do is be able to get it back out. Now we could do a get mapping by ID. So the same syntax as before. You just say, or that you used to with Spring MVC. And we just do to do item. So this is just get it. And again, path variable as you'd be used to before. So it's the ID and file string ID. And we can just do repository.find by ID. ID. So again, I mean, this is straightforward because the pipelines are pretty simple. And let's just do get mapping, say items. Oops. So get all the items this time. And this is where you'd return a flux. So we just say get all. And we don't need, so that doesn't need any path parameters, unless you want to do pagination and stuff like that, or you'd probably do them as request parameters. So request parameter will work. So we can just do return repository dot find all, and that's our controller written. So that controller that's there at the moment will store it in the database and allow us to retrieve it back later. So let's just save that. View, exit presenter mode, and rerun it. So while that's restarting, just back up the command line. No, that's because the starter already bundles that in. So if I send up a request saying that I accept JSON, it will know to respond in that. Or if I say XML, it will respond. So again, this is the advantage of Spring Boot, is that you don't have to configure all those beans that you might have had to configure if you were just using Spring Web MVC on its own. But the catch is, you have to do it the way that they want you to do it. You have to stick to their rules. Because if you want to do something like, you don't want to use logback for logging, you want to use log4j for logging, or log4j2 for logging instead. You have to do exclusion rules and all that, because they've already decided you're using logback, right? All right, so that's running, and I'm just going to switch to the browser, so we can just say, just verify that this is, sorry, not HTTPS, host, and it was items. So at the moment, we've lost the size there. Okay, so at the moment, it's just an empty list, okay? So I'm just going to curl in, curl, where's X? D, what is it? It's going to be, what did I call the task? I can't remember. Task. Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry. I'm just going to say task, cut the grass. And I'll give it a prior, sorry. Task, cut the grass, priority 1, and I'll just say X, sorry, it's minus H, isn't it? Accept, application, JSON. And we'll just do HTTP, localhost, 8080 items. And, oh, sorry. Actually, I can't see that. Sorry, application. Let's just make it the content type instead. So you don't see it there, but it just responded there. So because I said content type is application JSON, that's what it responded with. And now if I go back to the browser and I just refresh that, I get the other one, okay? So that's all it takes to write to the database in a reactive manner in Spring Boot. So we didn't have to configure any beans except the find the interface. So I didn't, and the controller. That was it. And that is really what it gives you. So, is there any questions, really? So the other thing is, I said out of the box, it gives you some features. So that's the actuator. So the actuator endpoints allow you to get information about your running container. Now there's a difference between Spring Boot 1.5 and Spring Boot 2, and the difference is that they made these more secure by default. So these used to be open before. So right now I can do a health check, and that tells me that my application's up. Now obviously I know my application's up, but really if I look under the hood, what that's done is that's checked that the Mongo connection is up. And any other thing that I've declared any other dependency that came in through a Spring on an external system that came in through a starter, it will check that. And if I can go in, there's an option I can go in, I can turn that off and say that this is sensitive by default, it won't show you that information. I can say, no, it's okay, show everybody the details, and it'll tell you the response of all the systems. You can also control the security on that, so you can say that you need to be authenticated for any particular endpoint. One of the useful ones is the environment one, which doesn't work. So the environment one is locked. You can actually go in and see all of the settings that were used to start up your application. There's a beans. You can actually go in and see which beans were actually created by your application. You can check all your properties. So especially if you're using external property sources, not just property files, but coming from a configuration server or something like that you might be in cloud native land, you can actually get that information back too. So the actuator is a fairly useful tool. And another thing that you can do is there's a HTTP trace. You can actually go and look at your last HTTP requests that were served by the server. So instead of, if you want to debug something that you're locally, that's pretty handy. It might not be useful in production, but unless, of course, you've got a very low volume, in which case Spring Boot is probably too expensive. So any questions on Spring Boot? Yeah?
So you're talking about the MongoDB database, but how is it connected? How does it know?
How does it know? So again, it's all auto configuration. So there is a property. I'll get it. I'll just open another app. Open recent. New window. So again, it's about you follow their rules. You don't have to do too much work. You want to change it, there's something else. So view. And actually this is a bad example because that doesn't have it in there. This one has it. Okay. File. View presenter mode. Right. I hate presenter mode. I actually don't know how to use IntelliJ that much.
If you press Command 1, you'll get the navigator bar on the side.
Oh, will I? That's what I need. I can go back to presenter 1 then. I think Barry should be giving away training courses in IntelliJ, not IntelliJ.
Hi, my name is George and I'm a Scrum Master at the Equifax R&D Centre here in Dublin. We focus on innovation and collaboration and have a fast-paced, team-driven environment where everyone is a key contributor to high-priority initiatives. We have a very healthy and vibrant agile development community where there is a focus on automation and CI/CD to ensure that the highest standards of quality are maintained. If you would like to learn more about us, please get in touch through our website, which is equifax.com.
I'm in the right project now. Command 1, there we go. So there's the application. So you can configure this with YAML or traditional properties file. So I've configured it with YAML. I just like YAML. So if that URI there, so there's a lot of predefined properties that the starters understand, and the Spring Data Mongo, they control various aspects of the Mongo connection. So you can either take the defaults or you can specify your own URL there. So in this case, I'm talking to localhost, a database called config. Now, in that application I am. In the other one, it's called test, right? So it just uses, by default, it's localhost test. That's it.
Specify a port number?
Don't need to, because the default port number is 27107, right? So if you're using the default one, that's what it uses.
You said you were using a Mongo container, doesn't that have different IP?
Sorry, I'm using it in a Docker, yeah, but I bound the port to localhost 2017, just so that I didn't have to do anything. Yeah. And like obviously, what you can do is like not so much here, but if you're running in Cloud Foundry or something like that, you can actually load these resources from externally, and it's quite simple to do that. I have another example in another project. We did it with the kids in Coder Dojo, where we deployed onto Cloud Foundry, and we were talking to a MongoDB instance running in their Atlas service, and we just had to define, the application itself didn't have to do anything. We just had to define in the deployment descriptor for Cloud Foundry, we just had to put that in there. The application needed no settings to pick it up. But we had to, obviously, include a starter that knew how to read the settings for Cloud Foundry. And again, so like they're all at the server port. So I mean, there's generic ones like server port that work for all containers, and then if you have Tomcat, there's Tomcat specific ones where you might want to change your access log format, the location of the log file formats and stuff like that. But ideally, you shouldn't be doing any of this, right? You don't want to have anything here, because you want your application, and what we'll do is we'll talk about that in the next section. You want to be able to have all that configuration externalized and loaded from an external service at startup, and that's what that other file is for.
Sorry, can you explain the difference between a request coming in and passed off to a controller that returns an item of type to-do list compared to a controller that's returning an item of flux?
So
wraps a to-do list. What's the difference in the architecture?
If you're using Webflux, you have to return a flux. So it's able, and Jackson is able to. So with a traditional one, Jackson is able to it's got that object, it's able to return it, just turn that into JSON and return that back to the output buffer, right? In this example, if it's a mono, when that function runs, when we return from that function, we haven't done anything. All we've done is, all we've done is we've created a request to do an insert, but we haven't actually done it. And the container, the Webflux container built on top of Netty, will now execute that pipeline. And when it finishes, it will return, it will take care of turning that into JSON. So it's pretty much the same when it's a single object. From a user's point of view, it's the same.